Hello friends, it's Oz at kctvmedia.com. We're still in February, but I'm looking back at some of the things that I promised I would do, and I'm actually going to speak out another brief testimony that occurred actually last year on the 12th of December 2014. Now this happened as I obviously got up early because I wanted to get a taxi into town to pick up the coach connection into London. So I'm going to be reading this off a particular message that I sent to my colleague about that particular day, and this was done a few weeks later. So on the 12th of December 2014 at 5:13 a.m. the taxi arrived outside my house. I had booked the taxi a day earlier, making sure I would get my coach connection into London. I had my bags already packed and went outside to meet the taxi driver, who was also talking on his mobile phone. I sensed that the taxi man was nervous for some reason as he put the bags into the Mercedes van. I asked if there was something troubling him, and he said that he'd had phoned my home phone number minutes earlier and was speaking to a man on my home phone number who didn't want the taxi anymore, which I thought was very bizarre. And we both realised that this was crazy, as he saw me walking towards him as he was talking to this man on my home number. So who was the voice on the phone? I quickly realised that this could well be a demonic entity who was trying to stop my journey to this prophetic meeting in London over 2 days. I quickly explained that I believed that the enemy was trying to stop me. He smiled, but said he was not a practicing Muslim, because I asked him, I said, are you a Muslim or are you a Christian? Do you have any faith? But he did say this. He said, I felt I heard a voice saying not to drive away out as I was outside your house. I had a few minutes to share how the enemy can twist things, and I certainly felt that I had to share a little bit about a friend of mine who I do a lot of filming for, a chap called Reverend Peter Scuthan, who's actually writing a book about his life right now, covering some of the amazing stories that God has done over the last 60 years in Peter's ministry. In fact, I remember Peter on this occasion some 7 years ago talking about the BBC covering this particular very strange situation whereby very bizarre things were happening in a place called Kingswood near Yate, north of Bristol. I can tell you that certainly plates were flying through the air, books were whizzing from one place through walls and coming out the other side with pages alight, and there was a lot of strange things going on in the community where people would say they would do one thing, go to that person's house, and for whatever reason that person would say, I don't even know you, what are you doing here? Some very strange things, and Peter in the end realized that this place had to be exorcised. So he performed an exorcism on the place, and it took over 2 years for this place to return back to some kind of normality. And the BBC covered this, and of course when I heard what this taxi man was talking about, I could see or sense straight away in the spirit that Satan certainly didn't want me to be going to this prophetic meeting up in town. And I did have actually other divine encounters that very day. One with a particular lady at the Victoria ticket office who was in front of me, and I was waiting in a queue, and she basically with her finger asked me to come across, and I couldn't understand why the other people in front of me wouldn't go to that particular woman. So as I came to the ticket office, she said, "Good morning, sir," and I said, "Good morning," and she said, "What kind of morning have you had already?" And I said, "Well, if I told you, and I can tell you what's just happened to me about 3 hours ago back in my hometown to do with a taxi driver." And of course, when I told her, she kind of very nervously, I can understand why, said, "Are you a believer?" And I said, I'm born again." And I said, "What about you?" She said, "Well, I go to church." And I kind of smiled, and I thought, well, what does that mean? I said, "Do you know him personally? Because if you do, you have a testimony. You'll have a testimony to share." And I said, "Do you mind if I give you this little blue card, which is part of our witnessing ministry, which shares people the information that I believe people out there, doesn't matter what race or religion they're from, need to know about. And you can get that information, as some of you are aware, by going to kctvmedia.com. Certainly look at the religious links, but you'll see that anyway. So let me come back to the testimony, because I realised that this morning was going to, certainly on the day, lead to other things happening, and that sure did. In fact, on the last day of the gathering, a friend of mine called Dennis Greenidge came over, and we had a chat, because you see, Peter Scudden had a hand in leading Dennis, a very well known pastor in London, to the Lord some years ago, and asked me how Peter was doing. And so I said, "Well, Peter's writing his book now." And he said, "A lovely man. God has really done some amazing things in his life." So I realised at that moment there was something that I had to share. I had a word that was, as it were, waiting to be released. And I said, "I don't know what this means directly. I mean, I have some thoughts, but God has put this in my heart recently, that has God's elect been deceived already?" And I had to say it 3 times. And on the 3rd time, he looked at me and he said, "Oz, you won't know this, but that same sentence has been given to me recently, and I will have to share this in Jerusalem in a week or so's time, because I know that it's something that people need to hear. Have God's elect been deceived already?" And I said to him, "We will have more information on KCTV site about this, so please stay in contact with us." So you see, if I hadn't have gone that morning, if I had been tripped up by the enemy, if that taxi driver had literally driven off, I probably would have got another coach up to London. But the reality was, God was in it. And in fact, I'm just thinking about it, there was a 3rd divine connection with a guy from Fiji who was a Catholic guy and didn't understand this, how to be born again, which I shared about John 3:3, how you must be born again. So testimony is very powerful, and I hope so far the testimonies you've heard, you will have time to listen to them again and share them with your friends. Thank you. Until the next time.